Hi, everybody. This is our third in our semi-weekly series. This is our fourth webinar. And essentially, thanks everybody for joining us. Bob Coppedge, Simplex-IT. This is being recorded and will probably be on YouTube by late Wednesday, tomorrow, or Thursday, as well as those of you who we have your email addresses, we'll be sending all the links and the decks and all that information to as well. So appreciate it, and going to go ahead and share my screen again. So, and as always, we would love to get feedback from you guys during this presentation because honestly, I put this thing together, so I already have heard all this stuff. So if there's particular questions or comments or the like, we would love to hear from you. Same information as always. The link for, it's the same link for all of these webinars, and yada, yada, yada. This one we're going to be talking about working from home security. Now I want to be clear here is that this topic is not going to be a thorough talk about cybersecurity. This is going to be more along the lines of what specific issues come up because of the work from home situation. So absolutely feel free to join in through the chat if you have any questions or specific issues or thoughts. Cool. Caveats are the same as always. I'm not a healthcare expert. I am, however, condescending. And also, I don't always say the most appropriate things. So bear with me on those. And again, we'll be emailing everybody once stuff is up online. If you're not getting those, please give us an email, send us a chat, whatever. Let us know you're not getting them. We'll make sure you're on the list. Today, again, is work from home strategy or security. The next one's going to be work from home habits, troubleshooting, yada, yada, yada. Boy, we would love to hear. So we thought we had it down pat, planning between now and April 21st. We may have to go further. And honestly, this is one of those where if the feedback we get is that these are worthwhile, we'll continue to do these as long as we have topics. So please give us some feedback. We love also love us on social media. You know, we think this is information that other folks can use. So if you think so too, like us, like what we post on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, watch the video on YouTube, even if it's just to like us, all that kind of thing, because that really helps us out. Plus, it gives us feedback that we're actually doing something worthwhile instead of just twiddling our thumbs, although I am quite the thumb twiddler. So, again, throughout this, we're going to give some takeaways. The takeaways are kind of two types, although they do sometimes, you can't tell which one it should be. You got brains. These are points you should consider. Broad, this is something you should start doing. So just like every other webinar we've talked about, we want to give you something to actually take away. So same as before. So what are we going to cover today? First of all, a lot of my talk is really going to be from the corporate company standpoint, because from a personal standpoint, it's business as usual. You know, your computers, your home stuff, all that, you should be protecting already. And some of the stuff will be useful for that scenario, but most of this is going to be aimed at the company standpoint, and mostly from a strategy and a process. Okay? So we're really just going to be talking about the stage, you know, what's our scenario that we're finding ourselves in, strategies, really the question, and this is a huge one, whose device is it? And where's the data? And then finally, we'll talk about people, those really annoying things that seem to, well, they're not as annoying as they used to be because now they seem to stay clear of me, which is a great thing. So, anywho, now, again, cybersecurity is a fantastically important, critical topic. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of nuances there. And that's not going away anytime soon. And as I've said many times, the bad guys are entrepreneurs. They have found ways to make it pay, and as long as that's the case, they're going to keep at it. And unfortunately, change in society, change in industry, change in technology, change in any of these sort of things introduces almost always opportunities for the bad guys to take advantage of this. And they're doing so. So we need to make sure through this scenario, because if you think about it, number one, we're suddenly dispersing the workforce. So we've got people who aren't working from they're not working from the office anymore, so they can't walk down the hallway. You've also got it where that a lot of the things that were taken for granted, you can't anymore, all of these. So the bad guys are saying there's some opportunities. Plus, there's opportunities in terms of fear. And plus, with this whole bailout program, the $2 trillion, now there's all sorts of information that's going back and forth. So the bad guys are adding their pieces to try to basically send emails that say, hey, click here to apply for the payroll forgiveness program. Not really. So be really, really extra careful about this sort of stuff right now, because the bad guys, they smell blood in the water. So, and here's the second point. When we talk about employees working from home, if they're working from home on their own equipment, you as an organization cannot assume that those devices are secure. Someone can say, oh yeah, we've got antivirus. Oh yeah, I patch it all the time. Oh yeah, but how do you know? How do you know? There's a reason why most organizations have some method, such as a managed service provider, yay us, or an internal IT department, yay them, or a combination, yay Coppedge, to actually manage and monitor and maintain the infrastructure and the devices and the people. Well, by letting people work from home on their own devices, you've essentially said, well, it's not that important. Well, as we'll talk, that's really, really dangerous thinking. And if you get used to it, that's a good thing, because this triangle is going to show up a lot. Time, cost, and quality. In this particular case, we're really talking about productivity versus cost versus security. Those are the three sides of the triangle. And what I mean by that is that when you increase security, however you want to define that, you're either going to decrease the productivity. Oh, now someone has to go through all these hoops in order to sign on or get access to something, or you're going to increase the cost. Now we're going to buy additional equipment or additional services that are going to do some of that stuff automatically. And there's no way around that. There's no way around that. And that's a conversation that really has to happen, especially with management. And we'll talk about that as we go forward. So I love this triangle concept. And for those of you who are in IT and work with management, I strongly suggest you try to have the conversation not during a crisis with management about how this concept worked, because it is a much easier metaphor to bring up later when it actually, you're basically saying, when somebody says, hey, we want absolute security in place by tomorrow, it has to be rock solid, foolproof. Oh, and we can't impact productivity. Oh, and you don't have any money to spend. For you to be able to say, well, you remember that time we were talking about the triangle? We can't do that. We can't implement this without affecting this or impacting this. It's a great metaphor, and I've used it, dozens of times over the past 30 years or so. Since I first learned it, I think back in the early 90s or so. There's nothing new on this concept, but it's a great, great concept. Okay, so here's one of the first things I suggest you do from a company standpoint, as best can. And this is actually a management question, but what is the priority? In other words, if we take a look at security, cost, and productivity for right now, what is the priority? And if you go, well, they're all equally important, well, that means they're all least important, So if somebody had to say, what's the breakdown, just in general, and just get them to give you, especially if you're the internal IT people or you're just planning and trying to figure this out for yourself, this is a great way to say, well, no, security is more important. So we're going to make security at 50%, and then cost and productivity, we can deal with a little hit in productivity. So we're going to make cost is 30% important and productivity is 20% important. That way, whenever some of the decisions need to be made in terms of how are we going to make modifications or changes, you can go back to that and say, remember how we said it was 50, 30, 20? Well, that's why we're improving the security, but at the cost of little lost productivity and increased cost. Okay, this is a good takeaway, and it's not a bad takeaway to have under any circumstances, but especially right now, because that way your organization has some definition to work from. So I strongly suggest that kind of thing. Now let's set the stage. When we talk about the working from home, by and large, what we have is what kind of functionality? And I'm just putting this up there as a very, very simple. A lot of cases, the work from home is we have the home user who's got the home computer network. And by the way, when I say home, it can be anywhere. It can be at a Starbucks. Well, no, it can't. It can be out at a park with a, I don't know where that person is, but that person is not at the office. So you have the home or remote user. They're going through a firewall of some kind. They're going through the internet. Then they're connecting to the server. So what kind of functionality, first of all, what kind of functionality we require from those work from home folks? What kind of applications? What kind of access do they need? All of that kind of fun stuff. And then, and we talked about this, I think last Monday, or no, 2 Mondays ago, when we did our first webinar that was more or less a trial. We did work from home strategies. When we talked about what is the strategy that we're going to have them connect through. Is it going to be just a VPN connection, or is it going to be a VPN through a remote desktop, or is it going to be using a third party like Screen Connect or the like, or LogMeIn or the like? Whatever those strategies are, again, Mark Twain, it's okay to put all your eggs in one basket, just watch the goddamn basket, all right? Whatever that strategy is, you just need to make sure that's implemented consistently and appropriately throughout your organization. And IT, from IT standpoint, you need to, and this is true whether it's an internal IT department or again an MSP or a partnership or a vendor, we call them seagulls, you need to then communicate to management the vulnerability. In other words, what sacrifices are you making in order to use that particular strategy? But that's fine, and management needs to work with IT to accept the vulnerability, approve the cost, approve the productivity, all of that kind of fun stuff, because that makes it much easier then to implement the solutions once we've got, here's our strategy we're implementing. Okay? But here's the key thing, is we want to make sure absolutely that this traffic is, however it's implemented, is secure. And one of the biggest vulnerabilities out there right now is to use a technology called remote desktop that is not encrypted. It's not secure just by itself. You'll also hear remote desktop, you hear terminal server, you hear RDS or RD, any of those types of terms. If it's done with a VPN, virtual private network, then it can be a good, strong solution. If it's just by itself, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Okay, and I'm not going to go into technical details on that. It was part of the webinar we did a couple weeks ago, and happy to chat in more detail about that should anyone be interested. Okay, so what's the takeaway? When you think about it, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, you really want to have a standard, especially if you've got multiple employees from multiple locations, for multiple reasons, blah, blah, blah. You want to standardize these access strategies for the organization. Really, as much of it as you can, one size fits all. And the reason I say that is because, keep in mind, complexity is dangerous, because complexity basically means that things are more, what's the word I'm looking for, complex, in terms of how we deal with it, how we protect, how we manage, how we monitor, how we implement. And complexity to me is how many words do we need to describe a situation or a scenario. And the more flexibility we show in terms of how these things are done or how these things are implemented, the more opportunities there are for us to be missing something in terms of how we're protecting it, and also for them to be vulnerabilities for bad guys to take advantage of. So we want to try to have as many single solutions as possible, but we also have to recognize that there's multiple ways for us to access the data. So we could be looking at on-premise applications. These are applications that are running on the computers, on the servers at the office. Similar on-premise documents, Word documents, Excel, that kind of thing, that are also stored. The solutions for both of those can be different. And then what about the stuff that's in the cloud? Well, you have the private cloud, which are basically servers or devices that your organization is actually renting, Azure, AWS, all that kind of Rackspace, all those kind of guys. And then you also have the public cloud, Office 365, Salesforce. The cloud applications, for the most part, are treating, with some very specific exceptions, especially on the private side, most part have the same security requirements and risks from someone working remotely as they do someone working from from your office. The exception would be if you are creating some site-to-site VPNs between an on-premise location and the Amazon or Azure or AWS or whatever. But the cloud, you have to work with the vendors who are providing those resources. Okay? But standardize. Standardize. The next topic I want to talk about is whose device is it anyway? This is where you get into the whole BYOD, bring your own device. The challenge we've got with bring your own device is that it is easy to implement people being able to use their own computers to work from home. Because all we need to do is just add a VPN, give them access to stuff, and let them rock and roll, and it's good to go. Here's the question. How secure is that device? Does that device have all sorts of viruses already on it or ransomware already that just hasn't been executed? Does 4 or 5 different family members have access to that device? Is there a keylogger that is actually keeping track of the keyboard keystrokes that are put in play? We just don't know. Is it patched appropriately? So it's missing out. So in other words, we don't know how vulnerable it is. Now, usually for an organization, you want somebody monitoring and managing your stuff so that we know that that's taken care of, that's monitored, that's protected. And for someone's home device, from the get-go, we don't have that access because, you know, when you bring somebody on board as an employee and you say, hey, by the way, we love to really monitor and keep track of what you're doing with your home computers. Is that a problem? Probably not going to go over really well. But if they use their computer to access your data, you're going to take their word? And they may be the most well-meaning people on the planet, but they're probably not IT. In which case, they don't know whether or not their stuff is secure and appropriate. So BYOD sounds nice and it sounds great, but it actually has a lot of risks. So it's easier, it's cheaper. Oh, wait a second. So time and money, it's quicker to do, so we do well on time. We do better on money. Oh, but we lose on security. There's that triangle again. Okay. So, okay, well, what if you go ahead and monitor it? Or you add your own security software. You add your own antivirus from the corporate standpoint. You'll take care of it that way. Well, then you've accepted responsibility. So what if there are issues with that computer? Suddenly stuff stops working, or now there's troubleshooting that needs to be done. Have you, because you've added these resources, have you accepted responsibility to fix everything? It's a good question, and it's one that you need to have some kind of verification, and you also need to have some kind of support, offerings, recommendations, anything along those lines. The bottom line is that the larger the organization, the more BYOD should be avoided. Also, the more rigorous the requirements are, especially if you're doing anything requiring any kind of HIPAA, SOX, anything along those lines, the more BYOD should be avoided. Simply because it is harder to prove that you are safe and secure. You're hoping, but how do you verify that security? The next question I've got is, where's the data anyway? And you'll notice I've got pretty much 4 devices here. I've got the home user or the desktop computer. Then we've got mobile devices. We've got the corporate server, which will be where all the on-premise stuff is. And then we've got the cloud-based data. And actually, we could also put workstations behind the corporate firewall here, which would be your traditional on-premise network. Now, depending upon the applications, depending upon the data, depending upon all things, the data could be on any of these. And it could be on only one. It could be on all of them, technically speaking. If you take a look at some of the file synchronization tools, like we use Anchor, OneDrive for Business, you could have it on the home computer, on the mobile device, and on the cloud-based Office 365 servers. If you use the tool that we have, which we use called Anchor, it would actually be on all 4. It would be on the corporate servers, the home users, the mobile device, the cloud-based data, all of that kind of fun stuff. But here's the question. What if it's only on the home computer? And by the way, the home computer can still be corporate owned. Are we backing that stuff up? We talk about DLP, data loss prevention. We want to make sure that the data, wherever the data is here, is lost in terms of we don't have someone stealing it, we don't have someone manipulating it in an inappropriate manner, whether there be an employee or not. We don't want it to be destroyed without the ability to recover. We want to do all those three things regardless of where this stuff is stored. Well, in order to do that, we need to first figure out where the stuff is stored. And on premise, it's fairly straightforward. It's stored on servers. We don't store stuff on desktops. We redirect, so all of my documents, all that, it's actually on the servers. Doesn't look like it's on the desktop. When we go on premise, or excuse me, off premise with work from home, that's a little harder to automatically say that without some strategies put in play. And this is especially true if we have people working from home that are not saving their stuff, or they're saving their stuff wherever they want to. This is true when you have employees who have their own Dropbox accounts, who have their own computers. It's okay, I've got a thumb drive, and I back stuff up at least once every 6 weeks. And I make sure the thumb drive works great. I put it through the laundry once a month to make sure it's not dirty. You know, you are, by letting the BYOD people use their home devices, by letting them use their own storage, by letting them use their organizations are essentially abdicating their responsibility to make sure stuff is okay. And it's also increasing the complexity because you could have 10 employees using 10, actually 12 different methodologies of saving and what they call backing up the data. So you should have some way of figuring out where the data is and whether or not stuff is actually backed up. And then there's also the question of, is it encrypted? If you have people who are working from home and the data, and there's two types of data, there's data at rest and data in motion. Data at rest is the stuff that's actually on the computer. It's stored on the hard drive, it's stored in the thumb drive, stored whatever. It's not being transmitted between locations. That's data in motion. And is the data at rest that's off premise, is that encrypted and is it backed up? If it's a situation where the data can be stored in multiple locations, we're not as concerned about the data being backed up because it's being backed up by being copied from the cloud to the on-prem device to the server to the whatever. But what if it's lost? What if someone's laptop is stolen? Is that data encrypted so when somebody tries to turn on that laptop again, we can make sure that they don't have access to the data? Okay? So you look at data loss in more than one way. Similarly, if someone gets hit with a malware and it encrypts their data, okay, then it goes and it encrypts the data everywhere it can access it. So it goes and encrypts it on the desktop, it encrypts it on the mobile device, it encrypts it in the cloud, it encrypts it on the server because it has access to all those things. Then how do we recover that data? Because it's encrypted everywhere. The answer to that is backup. So what I suggest, I love tabletop meetings, even though they're harder to do virtually. But a tabletop meeting is essentially where you get the appropriate people together and just shoot the stuff about a particular topic. And you essentially say, okay, where is our data? So let's go through all the applications we run, all of the stores of data that we know of, and let's talk about where is it located? How is it backed up? What's the cost if we lose an hour's worth or a day's worth or a person's worth of data, so on and so forth. And are we monitoring access? How do we do that? And how can we, I hate to say it, but you have organizations, I think Macy's just put 125,000 people on furlough. You know, if you do have to, and I hope you don't, if you do have to suddenly downsize or restrict employment, what do you do about making sure that the suddenly former employees don't have access to data? This is especially true if they're working from home and they have their own equipment. So you've got to walk through that, because the worst time to learn CPR is when someone's having a heart attack. Okay, so a tabletop meeting, go through this. This should be something that takes about an hour, maybe two, tops. Make sure that it's not just geeks who are attending this meeting, but some of the management folks, partially because that will open their eyes to what's going on. They need to be included in this discussion because in a lot of questions, especially when we talk about the value of data, the value of information, really a business question, not a technical question. It's a great way to get people in business to understand IT and the value of IT, but much better. So take this opportunity to bring them in on it. Backups. The final strategy for all things going bad IT are backups. Right now is here's where you verify your backups, you test your backups, you talk about your business continuity and disaster recovery strategies. What would happen, which get back into the if you had an outage, what is the cost per hour of downtime? Okay. What is the cost? And you either do that from an entire organization standpoint or from specific parts of the organization. Really depends on how deep in detail you want to go to. But what's the cost for an hour of downtime? And then what's the cost to recover data? So in other words, if let's say you do a backup every hour and 45 minutes in, you lose access to the data and the data gets destroyed. All right, you're out 45 minutes of data. How long, what's the cost to recover that 45 minutes of data? Okay, is there a question? Wasn't sure if there was or not. Okay. And as much as you can test this stuff, test it. Because we've run into more than once, we've run into situations where new clients have said, oh yeah, we've got good backups, and we take a look at it, and it turns out they haven't been backing up anything for a year. Or they've been backing up something, but it wasn't what they thought it was, or it wasn't complete. Or similarly, in terms of where they thought they could recover, in terms of just boot up a virtual server, so they'd be down no more than an hour. It turns out they couldn't do that at all. They would have to rebuild a server and take a couple of days of downtime to do that. So beware. Take advantage, of talking with people and see what you've got. Speaking of people, last topic, and we're finishing up now. People. I love mankind. It's people I can't stand. That was from Linus Van Pelt. My older sister used to have that as a poster in her room back when she and I were much younger. I still believe it today. As I pointed out earlier, right now, the bad guys are out in force. They recognize the fact that a lot of people are working in unusual environments with unusual demands that are given in unusual ways. And that's where you can come in and really screw with people. So the scams are significantly increasing. And now there's two types of scams. One's coming in offering virus support, and the other one is coming up offering support or help with the recovery packages as well as the financing. And this is going to do nothing but increase. And so my question is, have your people been trained? Have they been trained how to avoid risks? Have they been trained in terms of how to get away with without being taken advantage of? It is relatively cheap to put together a cybersecurity training program that can be monitored and managed, so you can actually see whether or not people are taking this. This also will usually result in a discount if you've got any kind of cyber insurance or liability insurance. So take advantage of that. And then also do phishing attacks. Actually do some simulated attacks to your people to see who actually falls for them. I would suggest do the training first. And then finally, policy and procedures. A majority of the clients that we start with don't have IT policy and procedures. They pretty much, they know not to do that. They know they shouldn't do that. Really? Have they been told that they really shouldn't do that? Have they told, here are the results of the actions that you take? Just to assume that they'll know, no, it's not really good enough. So yeah, train them. The bad guys are investing. I truly mean this as an entrepreneur. The bad guys are investing a ton of money. They're hiring good people to get them to come up with inventive ways to get your money. What are you doing to counter that investment as far as people goes? Because that is the favorite tool, or one of the favorite tools. Like I said, it includes simulated phishing attacks, and it also includes putting together some policies and procedures. Put some teeth behind it. Tell people, look, we're going to give you advantage of the training. We're going to give you advantages of simulations, but it's your responsibility. And if you abdicate that responsibility, you're violating the policy and procedure. You're putting your employment at risk. It's a reasonable precaution, just like you would say, you don't let strangers into the building unsupervised. So now we actually do have an offer, in case anyone's interested. Okay, maybe not with that face. If anybody would like to have a 30-minute free phone call with me on this or any of the topics we've talked about, again, most of you guys I think have known me or have talked to me, whatever. This is not a sales pitch. We want to help, but this is essentially a link that will take you to my calendar, and you can block out the time right then and there. It'll create a calendar for both of us to just have a phone call, a chat. Again, no strings. Happy to do that. And the one thing, again, please give us feedback. We're looking to do this on a constant basis, but if we don't have a lot of people saying this is good stuff or people telling us this works, please do so. Please give us some feedback. So Deborah, sharing in Office 365 is not as secured if everyone can access files on the shared drive of the company. So it depends on how you do it. When you share in Office 365, which would be essentially using OneDrive for Business or SharePoint Online, you're able to specify which users in your organization can see what is that data and that information. You can also add people from outside your organization who can access that data. And in addition to that, you also, if you're using the synchronization tool, which actually shares, so you have the data that's actually stored on your computer as well as up in Office 365, that's not necessarily secure if someone gets their laptop stolen. So by and large, sharing in Office 365 is reasonably secure if it's done right. But that's the key thing. And the other thing is Office 365 is not backed up by default. All right. So you need to make sure that somebody that is backing up the Office 365 data as well. That will be the other thing. Does that make sense? Cool. They don't often make sense, so you might want to make a note of that. So final. Again, we will be back on Thursday. Most of you will be receiving an email tomorrow or Thursday that will have the link to this webinar as well as the PDF document, which will contain all the slides and all that kind of fun stuff. Please share this with other people. We'd love to see more people attend and take advantage of this. We're just trying to help. So with that, unless there are any other questions or the like, I think we are done. Thank you all, and hopefully see a bunch of you Thursday.